Sorry. Yes. On the media issue, of course, Amnesty, you know, we use media, all forms of media, social media, traditional media, electronic media, widely to not just to raise money or raise our profile, but actually to mobilize people on various issues. I think the important thing here is what also media is doing is it's forcing NGOs, humanitarian or human rights NGOs, to become more accountable, and that's a very good thing. And I think that is something that no one's mentioned around here at all, and that is our accountability for those whom we work, with those whom we work, and that's another way of actually in the long term creating more security for ourselves, is through that openness and transparency and people understanding what we are doing and how we are helping, and us learning also from that process. Do you find that media or new media is helping or hindering?
Well, I mean, it's obviously it's both. It has very positive effects in trying to get information out quickly on what's happening. It's an incredible resource for moving people in terms of influencing them and getting a better understanding of the issues that are happening. But it has these challenges that have been brought up already of the same types of data that are now so quickly available still need to be analyzed to some extent and perhaps packaged a bit so that we can protect some of our mandates to be able to remain on the ground. As we brought up before, you know, providing quietly the violations of human rights to the relevant agencies in collaboration is one thing, but to have, you know, questions immediately available from a journalist direct to a staff member in the field via a blog or a Twitter can endanger our operations on the ground. So yes, I would also add though that it also has military implications in that some of the information that can be used or is coming out quickly or has a capacity to be used by either state or non-state militaries in their in the conflagration. So.
For easier communication amongst your staff, and then also amongst the different NGOs, and it would have facilitated everybody's work. Yeah, but with dangers, you say. Go ahead, please.
My name is Jayavira. I'm from UNESCO. I'm the Director of Communication Development Program, and we work within the mandate of UNESCO to support free flow of information. I want to bring a little bit emphasis on the safety of journalists, because this is one of the most dangerous jobs currently. Nearly 700 journalists were killed during the course of last 2 years. They're not necessarily because they worked in conflict situation. Most of these killings happen in non-conflict situation because they were investigating into issues like corruption, illegal logging, pollution, and other social evils. But these a problem with regard to the killing of journalists. Nearly 87% of these cases went without any investigation. Impunity is a major issue. So last time the UNESCO called upon member states, naming all the killings and all the member states where these killings occurred, to report back to the UNESCO on the judicial follow-up being done in each of these cases, and we are expected to publish a report on the basis of the information we received by next March. Unfortunately, many number of member states did not report because apparently there are some connivance between the political authorities and some of these killings. That's number one. So how do we react to this situation? I think we need a lot of investments in organizing journalists' unions in the first place to defend themselves in their own countries, and to provide safety training to journalists in certain situations, like in the conflict situation where some killings have been occurred.
Okay, but whose responsibility is that? Who is going to provide that training?
There is an International News Safety Institute which was established through UNESCO support, and they do support a number of national organizations, Journalists Association for safety training. But these safety training are largely related to the conflict situation, like any UN staff who visits a conflict situation has to undergo training.
Is there a parallel organization that trains humanitarian workers before they are sent into conflict areas?
Yes.
There are a number of different organizations that provide that capacity, and internally we do.
I think we need to hold the governments accountable on the cases of impunity. And this is where the donors and the other NGOs and UN organizations can come together and to pressurize bit on governments, at least to make them report about the judicial follow-up of these cases, and to make them known that what is happening with these cases. And don't forget, of course, I know that I do not want to say that the humanitarian workers are important, but in most agencies, the humanitarian workers are insured. And not like in the case of journalists. And once the journalist is killed, the families have no recourse. And many media organizations do not provide safety nets or insurance for journalists. So these people are taking risk on their lives to provide information for us. And if we had to promote climate literacy or whatever, we need journalists. I mean, you cannot replace with a Twitter and other things, new media, with the functions of journalists who has to go to the site, interview the people, investigate. The investigation takes time. You cannot do it like what you do it like a blog done by any person. So they are trained people. So that's one aspect, is that we need to support the journalist organizations to defend themselves. The other thing is, I think also that we need to promote what I would call media education among the general public, because the general public understand the functions of journalists. So they can demand accountability from their own governments whenever a journalist is killed. And we have no international instrument particularly to safeguard journalists other than the Geneva Convention, under which journalists falls in the conflict situation. But this is a very, very grave situation. I mean, imagine 700 journalists were killed. In which occupation such killings has happened, other than in the journalist occupation? So we need to take much more proactive role throughout the UN system and with the civil society, with the governments. So I would, of course, urge you to pressurize it, whatever way you can do, at least for the national government to report back and take the accountability as a serious issue.
Well, of course, for Amnesty International, protection of journalists raising these cases is an everyday business for us. But as you said, many of the journalists, there are more journalists killed in peaceful situations than in conflict situations. So many of them tend to be targeted killings, sometimes for exposing corruption in humanitarian operations. So I think what we're basically saying is that even for successful humanitarian action, you need a modicum of respect for human rights, freedom of expression, for example. Unless you have openness, your humanitarian operations, you need that openness in order to ensure that your relief or your materials are getting to the right people in the right way. And journalists play a very useful role in exposing what's going wrong. When we come back to it again, it's a question of respecting freedom of expression. It's a question of addressing where attacks have taken place, investigating and prosecuting. And in some cases, for example in Iraq, we've pressed for those kinds of investigations. I'm not talking about armed groups, I'm talking about governments that were operating there to investigate when their military kills a journalist or a civilian, that there should be proper investigations and independent investigations. Most military investigations are internal. And that's very harmful. You never know what happens, and there is cover-up. So the whole area of impunity, pressure to create, to open up that space is very, very important. And I think that's where humanitarians and human rights can work, organizations can work together, because it is not in the interest of any of us to allow killings to go uninvestigated.